How do rocks work? Like, what even is a rock? And why are they allowed to move in the Pokemon universe? These and other questions will probably be partially answered here today on Gnoggin. Hey, you wanna hustle? You wanna tussle? Tussle some muscle? In a cussle? Cussle hustle. Cussle castle. There we go. Our videos would not be possible without the support of awesome sponsors like today's. Hustle Castle. You know, you think those two words would rhyme because they're so similar, but they don't. Game's fun, though. In Hustle Castle, you take control of a medieval castle to continually expand and defend. All the while, you have an important mission. You need to rescue the princess who's being taken away by the demonic Lord of the Abyss, who is sending undead, orcs, and dragons to defeat with your ever-improving armies of archers, tanks, mages, cooks, carpenters, treasurers, and alchemists. I love the alchemists. I love the alchemists. Also, the art style of this game, I recognize it, but like I can't quite put my finger on it. Stardust Crusaders. That's the one. So, you can support my channel by downloading Hustle Castle with my link below. Enter your nickname and you'll get a special bonus too. 250 diamonds and 3,500 gold. And when you get the ability to join a clan, why not join mine? We are the Knoggineers, and we're going to save that princess. So help me. And of course, massive thank you to Hustle Castle for supporting this channel. So there I was, sleeping normally for once, and boom! It hit me. Rocks hit me. Rocks are actually just boulders, but smaller. Yeah, I know I have terrible sleep problems and I should not be thinking about things like that while I'm trying to sleep, but the following day, that got me thinking about today's topic. How do rock-type Pokemon even work? Like, how do they exist? Why do they exist? And most importantly, what do they taste like? I mean, I eat rocks every day, don't you? I'm sure you do. It's called the American diet. You rock lickers. But to be honest, I actually love salt. Maybe it's because I'm naturally a nice, not salty person, and thus I need salt in my diet. Unlike Josh over there, behind the camera.
Oh, jeez.
But how could rocks exist as life? I mean, clearly the Pokemon world has a level of magic in it. I mean, the rock Pokemon shoot rocks out of their hands and mouths. But even disregarding that, at a fundamental base level, how could a rock be considered a living thing? Well, rocks are really cool, trust me. So cool that they have their own entire science called geology, or mineralogy, or maybe petrology. I guess they're cool enough to have 3 sciences. A rock is any naturally occurring solid mass or aggregate of minerals or mineraloid matter. It's really fun to think of things that are so commonplace in these complex ways with big words that you've never heard of before. I mean, what is water? You know, H2O, right? We all learned that. But did we really learn what rocks are? I know I did. There's the 3 rock groups: igneous rocks, metamorphic rocks, and sedimentary rocks. And I learned that the crust of the earth, along with dirt, is just small rocks and dead matter, I guess. But did you ever learn that rocks were? I grammared that up. Did you ever learn what rocks were and why they exist? Well, maybe you did, but it's been a really long time since 4th grade, so let's get you some learning. Turns out, most rock is about 70% silica, or SiO2, just like H2O. I guess O is just everywhere. And just like how water has a water cycle, rocks have a rock cycle. And thus, there are ever-changing forms of rocks, which is important with regards to Pokemon or any media that has rock creatures. You see, one of the problems that face rock-based life is how it would be able to reproduce, as that's the main requirement for life. All rocks go through the rock cycle, starting as any of the 3 types of rock, or magma, or bits and pieces of rock, endlessly being eroded and compacted, melted and solidified, and yeeted across the land, changing the very face of the earth. I remember before I knew what the rock cycle was, I was worried about the world eroding away because of rivers. Why, California education system? Why? Why did it teach me about erosion before the rock cycle? I was so needlessly scared for months. I also missed something about what carbon-based life really means, but I don't remember if that was 4th grade or some sci-fi movie. Carbon-based life means exactly what the name states. It's life that has its basis in carbon, the element. All life we've seen thus far on Earth has been carbon-based, but theoretically speaking, there are other elements that could work as a base element for life somewhere out there in the universe, like ammonia or hydrogen sulfide. But today we're talking rocks, not liquid. And as I stated, most rock is silicon. And it just so happens that silicon happens to be the most popular alternative life element. I mean, it's a trope at this point. Oh, the aliens are silicon-based life forms that eat rocks and are impervious to physical damage. Woo! But really, if some of these rock-type Pokemon literally are rock, like Geodude and Gigalith, then they would very likely have to be silicon-based life forms. So what does that mean, and why silicon? Well, it might be because silicon is the closest thing we have to carbon-based life. I mean, out of all 118 elements, life is simply based off of one. I mean, about 97% of the human body is made out of only 6 elements: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Yeah. That's what you are. A bunch of atoms mixed together. I could say it's one of the most complex life forms we have ever observed, but that's just my own brain saying that we're the best, and it's kind of rude to everything else. Kind of like the Miss Universe title. But why carbon? Why not base life off of hydrogen? Number 1, the first element, the most abundant building block. Why carbon? What about number 6? Makes it so special? Well, it might have to do with carbon's ability to react, yet at the same time, it's not extremely reactive, like hydrogen is. Carbon is able to actually exist without exploding by being near air, unlike, say, potassium. Carbon is also able to be found pure in the form of graphene. Heck, when you burn carbon-based things, you get carbon back. It's a rather unique part of carbon. Another nicety of carbon is that it's pretty friendly and can bond with just about anything, and ultimately carbon is extremely stable, which might be one of the main reasons life is carbon-based. Carbon can also break apart and reform easily as well. It really is the perfect building block. But the main and biggest factor could be the fact that carbon is able to form extremely long chains and structures. Being able to bond up to 4 atoms really helps. I mean, DNA couldn't hold all of the data needed to build humans if it was even a smidge shorter. It's this flexibility that makes carbon the perfect base. It can create huge structures. It's easy to bind and unbind to. Plus, the bonds are stable. They don't oxidize constantly. Speaking of which, if we look at oxygen, we can see that that molecule just loves to bond and unbond. It's not stable enough. And carbon's neighbor boron is... Let's just say that if you're that rare and impossible to find, it's rather hard for life to be existent based on it, you know? Carbon is one of the very few elements that are extremely abundant in the universe. Like, it's everywhere. And silicon is also a super common element. It's the 8th most abundant atom in the universe. So it almost makes sense that silicon-based life should exist somewhere. The only roadblock here is that silicon isn't carbon. Yet, even though it's different from carbon, it's extremely similar when compared to the other elements. I mean, it can react with many different types of atoms. It is able to hold on to 4 atoms at once, meaning it can form rather complex structures, so it sounds promising, right? It's pretty similar to carbon, but then, compared to carbon, silicon can form chemical bonds with fewer kinds of atoms, and it often forms less complex kinds of molecular structures with the atoms that it can interact with. So while silicon-based life sounds plausible, at least in the grand scale of the universe, it's just not quite as good as carbon. It really seems to just be the better option compared to most other things. But it's not like life can't use silicon. We know that microscopic particles of silicon dioxide, called phytoliths, can be found in some plants and photosynthetic algae known as diatoms. They use the silicon dioxide for their skeletons. Yet, there is no known natural instances of life on Earth combining silicon and carbon together into molecules. But we know that it could happen, it just hasn't yet as far as we're aware. I mean, we could make it happen with science, and if humans can do it, then why can't Mother Nature? The possibilities are endless, no? Maybe humans are just ahead of the curve here. We like to do that, don't we? Just to change the course of evolution, making the species worse off. We know that we can manipulate and mutate certain organisms to create organic silicon-carbon chemicals, some of which we've never seen before, thanks to recent studies. But enough. Complicated stuff. Enough about if it's even possible. How would it even work? I mean, a creature with rocks for brains sounds like a typical high schooler. So, let's talk Pokemon. Why are so many rock types always defensive? And while I'm sure the reason realistically is, they're rock hard, it may actually be more complex. They may, in fact, be silicon-based life forms. Think about it. Carbon is reactive to many atoms, hence why it's the basis for life. Silicon is still reactive in its pure form, but much less so, which sounds bad at first. It can't get as complex, and brains, as far as we're aware, are super complex. But silicon-based life does have one big advantage over carbon-based life. Fewer impurities. It's significantly more stable. Because let's face it, silicon is fat compared to carbon being carbs. It is almost twice the mass, meaning it has a bigger hold on its electrons and those of its bond partners. So little accidents, little mutations that cause cancer, for instance, those don't happen in silicon-based life. Silicon is denser, more massive, and stronger. And that could be the reasoning behind most silicon-based life in sci-fi being portrayed as harder, tougher, stronger life forms, like the Crystal Guy in Ben 10. So maybe Game Freak is onto something here, with rock type being all defensive. That also makes sense as to why it resists poison too. Most poisons and venoms take advantage of the weakness in carbon-based life, so it would be much less effective on a silicon-based creature. The silicon is larger and harder to bully. The bonds are doubled up and beefy and ready for normally dangerous solvents. Something that would hurt or ruin a carbon bond could very well be ignored and pushed to the side by a silicon bond. And another interesting bit is that silicon-based life may not get energy the same way carbon-based life does. Maybe it doesn't need to digest plant matter or other means of organic life. Actually, not all life as we know it already needs photosynthesis. And I'm not talking about just not eating plants and not needing plants whatsoever for energy. Everything we use today, all the power and energy on Earth, is from the sun. It's just trapped here by some means. Fossil fuels are just plants and animals that are storing the sun's energy. Living plants also absorb and store the sun's energy. Animals eat those plants, bigger animals eat those animals, and so on. But silicon life forms would be wild and crazy. Heck, even carbon-based life is crazy at times. Here's a new word for ya. Chemosynthesis. It's the cousin of photosynthesis. Instead of using the sun as a direct energy source, with chemosynthesis, the life form uses chemical reactions to create usable energy. It basically takes any molecule that contains carbon, or in this theoretical case, silicon, and just converts it into nutrients and organic matter via oxidation. Some scientists believe this may have actually been the first type of metabolism to evolve, and today it is still used by some deep ocean bacteria and giant tube worms, and it's theorized to be what would currently support life on Mars or Europa. But what this means is that yes, a living rock creature would in fact eat rocks to sustain itself. I just explained Gorons. I'm gonna repost this video in a few months and it'd be about Gorons. It could be that silicon-based life uses non-photosynthesis-based energy to exist in areas we aren't really looking for life in, the depths of outer space, where it's cold and no sun exists to give energy to the ecosystem. Yet, in Pokemon, we see many of them still eating poke food, the generic kibble that Pokemon love. Which is totally possible, I suppose. Silicon-based life isn't limited to just silicon. It's very possible that carbon-based life and silicon-based life could interact easily. Remember, they are basically related. Who's to say that they aren't actually just silicon-based life that eats carbon life for the same atoms that carbon-based life needs? I hope this isn't getting confusing. What I mean is, it's not all that rare to see animals, carbon-based life, have rock-hard pieces on their body, all based off of carbon. Carbon can also be extremely hard as diamonds even. Shells, scales, plates, and even quills are hard, all to varying degrees. So it isn't crazy to think that a silicon-based life form wouldn't have access to rocky outsides or even rocky insides like our bones. Just because it's a rock Pokemon doesn't mean it's solid rock. For every carbon-based molecule, there's a good chance a silicon-based one also exists. Yeah? For instance, sugar. Sugar is the basis of carbon-based life energy, yeah? There's polysilanes, or polysilanes. It's this word. It's a silicon-based sugar. It's just not all that stable here on Earth, which seems to be a recurring theme. Stability. Life loves stability. So rock Pokemon might not be too possible realistically. They could very well be silicon-based, but carbon-based still potentially would work because of creatures we see being rock hard. In fact, realistically, most rock-type Pokemon are rock-type because they have rock-hard parts, as opposed to are actually rocks. The ones that are actually rocks are a minority. In fact, here's a really good real-world example, and it's not just shells or hard armor plates. Here, I'm talking about a rock-like eye. Yeah, it's a recent discovery. Scientists found that a creature had hundreds of eyes that were all made of rock. Well, the lenses were at least. Chitons are mollusks related to snails, clams, and even octopuses. They look pretty much like a little old woodlouse, but with a skirt and a forehead that would make any Klingon jealous. Their armored plates are dotted with hundreds of little spots. Scientists knew that these spots were eyes from the get-go. I mean, it reacted to visual stimuli. Now, I won't bore you with the details, but one day, a scientist noticed that the lenses dissolved in an acid that's normally organic safe, and yet its lenses disappeared. Later they learned it's because the lenses were made of pure aragonite, a derivative of limestone, a carbonite crystal, i.e. still carbon-based, but yeah, it was actually a rock lens in an organic creature. So now, while not entirely silicon-based, this is a huge step in knowing that non-organic compounds can be found in organic creatures. I'm so sorry. Plus, I mean, how else would you explain some of the Pokemon being able to see? Gross, fleshy orbs set in stone? Or are the eyes rocks too? I mean, I'm sure having eyes that are extremely weak compared to the rest of you would be a huge oversight in evolution. Just no bueno. Just kick the Geodude right in the eye, and then it's no problem. Why have large weak spots like that? Have rock eyes instead, or at least a rock lens to protect the eyes, you know? But that's not to say that these weird eye things are strong. In fact, in the Chitin, it actually sacrifices its armor's toughness to have these crystalline structured eyes in its plating. The change in structure does overall weaken its armor, but it's still much more rigid than our gross jelly-filled eyeballs. Ow. The biggest reason that silicon-based life doesn't exist on Earth today is probably the fact that it doesn't play well with water, and Earth is stinking covered in this stuff. But that's right, both of the most reactive elements, hydrogen and oxygen, don't really like silicon when they get together. And yet, silicon, when it can find oxygen by itself, just loves to hold on to it forever. Whereas carbon can turn it into CO2. So it's easy to burn it apart. But with silicon, Well, it forms actual solids instead of a gas when it combines with oxygen, filling all 4 of its slots with as much oxygen as it can. Basically, it's like you would inhale oxygen and then you would exhale sand instead of CO2. Not exactly an easy feat. Carbon is a cool uncle atom. Silicon is the weird ant no one wants to talk to. Silicon-based life would have to use some other water replacer, like methane, something that isn't stable in normal Earth-like environments. It could also work with ammonia. Heck, there are whole theories on things that life could use besides water, these all being some of it. And thus, life based on these elements could exist on planets with atmospheres that are totally chemically different from ours. And to keep this vaguely Pokemon related, it could be that rock types could exist somewhere out there in the universe. And in the Pokemon world, they may not just solely be silicon or carbon-based. It could instead just be like a much more evolved chitin. A carbon-based organic thing that still manages to grow mostly inorganic parts. So in a magical world, who's to say that a creature like this won't start to eat minerals, or do other crazy things like that? Or maybe even have skeletons made of rocks, or fully inorganic rock exoskeletons. Could this be what some of the rock-type Pokemon truly are? Maybe. While being a silicon-based life form would work in theory for them, it would make life tough since the Pokemon world is basically Earth. So rock types could very well still just be carbon-based life, just with an ability that is similar to the chitin. Truly, they're fictional. But I mean, fictional magical creatures that have some sort of basis in science is still better than just some make-believe thing, you know? This is a good video. I love you for watching this far into it. And we're not even done. A lot of rock types could just be like insects. Extremely hard outside layers with goop inside. I mean, what if a creature was entirely made out of aragonite? Would it be a rock? Technically, yes, but it still would be a carbon-based creature. And even their potential energy source would be the glucose derivative, which is also slowly carbon-based. And that stuff is hard as rock. So what makes a rock type a rock? Is it the hardness? Is it having a part of themselves be inorganic and rock-like, be it a part outside or inside, like with some of the Fossilmon? And what if some of them are actually just rocks, like literally possessed rocks, with no actual scientific process in their locomotion? No muscles, no organs, no blood or respiratory systems, no brain, just actual solid minerals like Roggenrola. It's just a rock that moves. I guess anything is possible in the Pokemon world. That's a rock fact. Never stop using your noggin.